Hey, what's up guys? How's it going? And I'm just going to show you what I use for a test march whenever I'm testing on somebody. So like, for example, let's say I go out, I find a target like Gunther, for example, and I don't know his comp, don't know anything. Well, what I do is I'll send a test march at him and find my test march. There it is. Okay, and all that test march is basically the same thing that Worthy Prince is using, which is 33k. The only thing I do differently is I'm using these familiars instead, and then I'm just throwing in Berserker for army HP, and then basically maxing out Siege Engine for a 150 plus bonus, right? And I'll go ahead and send that march, and then once you've knocked him down and basically knocked that wall down, then all you gotta do is basically sit there and pepper him, okay? And by pepper, I mean literally just send like, you know, you could send like 30k. It doesn't matter if this number is 30, 50, 70, 100. It's really whatever the hell you're willing to lose. And then you want to either, I would say probably closer to 50 to 25, but you can get away with 25 in the other slots. And then obviously every time you do your marches, you don't want to be in counter. You do not want to add familiars because you'll tweak your goddamn march in such a way that you'll inadvertently screw up the numbers. And really, the only thing you have to pay attention to is basically the last 4 digits, roughly. And sometimes you'll get even higher drops, which that's usually not a good sign. But if you get anywhere in excess of the first 6 digits, usually that's about all you need to capture. So you basically just take that number, capture it, and then send your inf march, see what that number is, send a range march, and then send a cap. Then you're just comparing the difference in loss. Whichever one had more loss is naturally countering whatever the front line is. Now, it can be a little tricky because sometimes you'll hit wedge, and you can't tell when you look at the numbers is that range or is that range wedge? Is that cav or cav wedge? Is that inf or inf wedge? Naturally, everyone's gut is just to assume up front that if I know what the counter is, my gut's always told me to just assume that if that's the wedge or the inf that it might be, you're better to be right on it being inf than to be wrong thinking it was a trap or something else. This is why whenever you see somebody do a rally, they'll sit there and actually watch that guy's account for more than one thing. And this is, I think, not as talked about as much, but a lot of people will actually sit there and watch that guy's account for gear swaps. They'll check for anything for helps, any change in any stat that they can observe, because that tells you the guy's online and therefore not a good target. Now, that isn't to say that you can't hit him. It just means he's online and that the goal of countering him is no longer what we do in blasts, but rather we'll send mix. Now, when it comes to sending mix rallies, I think there's kind of like a couple of different ways to go about doing that. Namely that you've got people that'll do 866. I've had people do 947. And I've also heard of 424. And then there's also a lesser known one, which is 111. Now, as to what those acronyms actually refer to, okay, if let's say I go ahead and I just decide to rally this guy, 947 is literally 90,000 of this, 40,000 of this, and 70,000 of this. Now, naturally, it's not much different than a 424. It's just a little bit weaker cav and more infantry. The only time I ever see anybody do a 947 is usually on Wonders, but once in a while you'll do it on a mixed rally, and the only reason why is if you think the guy's in range phalanx and you want to do some damage, then you'll go in range phalanx and send this particular 947 at him. And of course, as far as your heroes go, you're basically buffing inf and buffing cav, and you're just letting the range get as much HP as they can possibly get. So that's kind of the idea behind that. Now, you can also see like a 111, which, again, if you want a 111, you're just evenly dividing 200,000 divided by 3. Okay, which, whenever you're sitting here and wondering why somebody would send that, you're just sending 66,000. Okay? That's literally mixed as mixed can be. That's all you have to do. And these are usually, the way we run them is we'll go range phalanx in a mix like this, and then for the heroes, I mean, we're going army HP all the way, but like most of the time you can't be completely super mixed, right? So you'll usually have kind of a balance of, you know, okay, if I've got some range heroes, I'll throw some range in and some cav in and some infid, and it's just kind of a well-balanced plate of potatoes. You know, so you'll have one cav, one range, one inf. Which, you know, in a perfect world, that's like, okay, that's god-awful. Why would you do that? Why not do 3 range and then 1 of each? Or why not do... And you could play around with that, you know, and that's the thing that's nice about mixes. I would say that usually I try to keep that as balanced as possible, I think, and that's really just, I think, the rationale behind it. And then for the actual familiars, they're just going for the highest amount of DPS possible. So a lot of these 600% and 150% bonus familiars are all getting abused and used like none other. They try to avoid using familiars that, you know, oh yeah, you need 10% to drop. Like, you typically don't want to go any higher than 10, so a lot of your 8% 150s don't get used as much as your 4%. You know, but once in a while you'll have somebody that'll go a little bit further. I mean, some people, like, for example, if you go range foul, you'll probably throw in some shields for your range troops to keep them alive a little longer. But honestly, that's what a triple wants. Now, typically it doesn't have to be T5, it can be T4. But the idea in principle, that's pretty much what that mix rally set is. Now, the 866 is a little different. That's, you know, again, going back to the 947 a little bit. But this is more, you know, instead of divvying up and making the range super weak, we actually add enough to even out both the cav and the range. And I believe I've seen people go infal with this, because the idea in mind is you're having the infantry soak up the damage, and then you have the sides take it. But I've just as easily seen people like flip-flop that on its head and actually go range foul anyway, even though they got a weaker cap line, and then just have the imp do that much more damage, assuming they hit range foul. Again, the main reasoning behind that is, I think, in part because they assume that they know whatever the guy's going to be hitting in. So they kind of make a conscious decision in this mix rally that, you know, I think this guy's range, so I'm going to send him. But they're not going to fully commit to it. While, you know, obviously if you knew he was inf, you would probably put in more cav, you know, so then you would be doing 668 and vice versa. But the idea in principle is really just to try and even that out as much as possible, and that way you do a mixed amount of damage. Obviously your gear needs to be as mixed as possible as well to do maximum returns on the damage, but that's, I think, really kind of what a mix rally is, as far as, you know, how you go about them. But obviously there are many different ways to skin a cat, so if you guys have any suggestions, feel free to comment below.